boiled cream treat. That's the best part of Skyrim.
What?
That's Skyrim. They eat those. You get boiled cream treat.
Welcome to the Fantom Zone. 3 fans.
3 fans.
1 podcast.
1 podcast.
And a sea of comics. Yeah. So, I guess at the beginning we wanted to kind of do some little housekeeping stuff. A little bit of... Yeah. A little bit of announcements, because we do make them on social media, but I guess we realize that maybe some people might not be on them or just, found us on iTunes or wherever. But yeah, so we've mentioned the blog before. It's at thefantomzonepod.com, and you can find that on the social medias, the link to it. And on there we have everything from the show notes for each episode. We have links to everything, pictures of the characters we talked about, or the ones we decided to spotlight.
Yeah, you can think of it like a companion resource for the podcast.
Yeah, and you can actually comment on stuff.
That's my favorite part.
Yeah.
Please leave comments. I love reading them.
Talk to us.
Yeah, and there's even like a little email form if you guys wanted to just kind of reach out to us personally. We have a couple people that have done that. I know Kayla's really happy about some of them.
Yes.
And we should get sponsored by Amazon. Hasn't happened yet, but it should, because all of our recommendations we link directly to Amazon, so you can immediately order them if you want.
We're really shooting for the stars here.
Exactly, yeah.
Except for Patreon. Because every Wednesday, whenever we go to the comic shop, we'll put, hey, this is the comics we got this week. I'll put links to buy them directly from Marvel and DC. Just to kind of give them a little bit of
I've seen the content we have on our Patreon, and it's awesome. And you are going to want to be a part of it. You're going to want to be on there. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the blog is really cool. The website's pretty cool. You can find links to all the places that you can listen to us on. But yeah, boring stuff done.
You want to do exciting stuff now?
Yes. The whole point of why
let's do an entire episode of boring stuff.
Just boring stuff.
Yeah, we could talk about why we are doing this episode, which is DC crossovers.
DC crossovers.
Specifically DC, because there's just too many. The episode would be 5 hours long.
It was hard just narrowing it down to like DC crossovers.
Yeah.
Which ones are we going to talk about?
Yeah, and we decided to do ones that had multiple teams, just either big cataclysmic universe type changing things, or it's kind of centralized, but you had the Bat family, the Superman family, everybody that was involved in it. That's kind of what we went with crossovers.
But we are going to do Marvel crossovers later.
Yes.
So just every Marvel fans hold on to your butts, because it's a coming. We're coming for your butts.
No.
Anyway.
Don't make it weird.
No, it's like in a good way, like in a comic-y way.
But yeah, I mean, part of the reason why we wanted to do DC first, Secret Wars came out before, some of them, but the thing that kind of shaped crossovers and that made them kind of a staple and big events that happen in comics kind of sprouted from DC and their troubles and turmoils in the beginning.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And man, are they troubled. These troubles are troublesome.
I couldn't find any happy crossovers,
Yeah, there isn't a lot like
there's not a reason for this.
No, because there's not one where it's like, oh yeah, we need to all have a tea party. I don't think the Doom Patrol has really hung out with the Teen Titans enough. That doesn't happen.
Hey, but they do have dinners and stuff together.
Oh, they do.
Doom
Okay,
Patrol,
well,
that'd be the one team that would have a tea party. To be fair.
Well, okay, so let's get into it a little bit. Before we talk about specific crossovers, like, what do you guys think? Like, what for you makes a crossover good?
I think that crossovers, when they're most successful, kind of function like how the Marvel movies did before the first Avengers movie, where you'll have cameos, maybe of little characters, and you'll have like a looming bad guy in the distance that you have to take care of, but that it's all building in that direction. So it maybe starts in individual comic books, like different issues with different characters, but it's like, oh, this is bigger than itself.
Yeah.
And then like it slowly builds to like, dun dun dun, this is the crossover part.
So it's kind of just, you like it when you can see that they're sharing a universe and that there's something kind of looming that's going to bring them all together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that part a lot. I mean, to me, I think a good crossover is something that has stakes. High stakes, not low stakes.
We know you like those world destroyers.
Yes. No, yeah, I do. But yeah, I mean, the bigger the reason for them together and all of them together or whatever's happening, the more I enjoy it because it's, it could be so far out there that it's just insane or, yeah.
Yeah, it needs to feel like the world's going to end, basically. In that case.
That's usually what happens with crossovers.
Yeah. there are a few examples of ones that aren't like that, but they are, I think, the minority. So I think a good example, we'll get into it later, but Civil War on the Marvel side is just one where it's like, okay, this is sort of just a internal.
Yeah.
And that's
I like those too.
That's a good example of I guess a localized crossover that's so well known, but it's not universe changing.
Yeah.
I mean, it could have if they decided not to be friends again.
Yeah. The universe of their friendship. But I guess even before we get into that, I did want to say too, there's something really cool about crossovers because it kind of distills what's awesome about comic books in the first place, right? Because the coolest thing, right, is about the Marvel universe, the DC universe, is that it's all these different characters that kind of live in the same world and that they could interact conceivably.
Yes, I love that.
Alan Moore, if you've heard it, has this great quote where he's like, if you don't read comics and you want to understand the magic of comics, imagine if Alice in Wonderland was kidnapped by Dr. Frankenstein and then Sherlock Holmes had to figure out how to save them. It's all these worlds.
Characters you wouldn't think would interact. You get to see them interact.
So all their stories kind of take place in this world, but a crossover is sort of like a specific event that capitalizes on just that cool thing about.
Yeah, there's no way that this team wouldn't be affected by this event or something happening. Yeah. Because you have people on the East Coast and the West Coast, and a lot of times they don't ever interact until America's being destroyed, and you have no choice.
What issue was this? Can I?
I'm sure there was an issue with that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's good that comics do. And it reminds people that, yes, they all share the same universe. Yes, things will affect everybody in this universe. And the stakes get really high.
And we're so burnt out with it now, but it's sort of, you almost want to imagine when that first happened in comic books, how crazy that had to be.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you're just reading these characters, much like it would be a novel or something like that. I think when the Submariner and the Human Torch first met, it was apparently, it's the 40s, so people were very simple, but it just blew everybody's mind.
How do they know each other? How are they in the same comic?
But Kayla, you mentioned the Avengers movie. People were sort of amazed all over again when that happened.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's happening in DC now where it's like, oh my God, they actually get to see Batman and the Flash talk to each other.
Yeah.
Yes. Aren't you?
Yeah. I love the Flash. I just want him to be best buds with Green Lantern.
We have a whole part of this episode. We're going to be talking about that. Yes. But yeah, it's my favorite part too.
And a callback to what you pointed out, I think in one of the earlier episodes, if what you really love is the relationships that these characters share,
me.
Exactly, then man, crossovers are your thing, right?
Exactly. Yes. and no matter the scale too. I'm not Noah. I like it when the stakes are multiple universes are ending. I like kind of
that's foreshadowing.
Way to be a dark side.
Yeah. Well, on the note of stakes, so there's this big thing that's happens in all crossovers. We'll get into nitty gritty in a bit, but it's worth, I think, wondering. So what happens in crossovers? People die. Dying happens.
Of dying.
So how do y'all feel about that? Because I think that's when you talk about crossovers, you got to talk about how you feel about characters dying.
I do and don't like it. I think it depends on what character constantly keeps dying.
Such a Flash fan to the end.
The Flash?
Is it okay if they run too fast? Okay, well, that's the ones that shouldn't die.
My.
Yeah, it depends because, we've talked about this. Almost every comic book fan has talked about they never stay dead. Mm-hmm. And for them to make this big deal about somebody dying, and then we know that they're not going to stay dead, We just don't know when they're going to come back. I mean, the Flash was gone for years and he did come back, but now they're coming back more quickly, or they have another crossover where they come back, or something explains it. It's good storytelling. It's good for that. But I mean, make it last, I guess. Like if you want to actually have an impact. So
I don't know. You'd piss off a lot of people who, that's my favorite character you just killed,
right,
DC.
And I think that goes to the point of like, should they even do that? I mean, they've done it in crossovers or big events before where there's been this kind of minor supporting character and they die and just never come back. Mm-hmm. Like you never hear from them again. And I guess it's not effective because they never come back, or they didn't really get a chance for people to care about them.
Yeah.
But it's this weird cycle of like, yeah, I really care about that character. Don't kill him. Oh my God, you killed him. Oh, they'll be back.
You've put your finger, I have never thought about it like that, but you've put your finger on an interesting like correlation, right? Because it's sort of like, if a character dies, the more unimportant they are, the more likely their death will happen. Like they'll actually be dead, but no one cares.
Yeah, it's like The Walking Dead, like in the TV show, where once they started having like a episode about a specific character that never was in the forefront,
you're like, oh no,
they died 2 episodes later. Yeah.
So, and then the more likely you care about the character, and impactful to death, the less likely it'll be permanent.
It's emotional manipulation.
Yeah.
That's
and
what it is.
We've talked about it before too. It's also this sort of artists, the writers versus the commercial needs of the industry. So it's like, I want this character to have a dignified death. And then the editors and business people are like, okay, but we want to drag their corpse up and make a movie. So you're really going to have to do it. Yeah.
I mean, and it gets a little weird too with some of the crossovers, because you could tell they're self-contained, or even just big events. So you could tell they're self-contained, and whatever happens in it, depending on how well it was received, is not going to stick through the main continuity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just usually what happens.
But then without, if you want the stakes high, you at least have to have the plausible belief that they might die.
Yeah, but I mean, you could just have the stakes being high so heroes save people.
Yeah.
That is their whole thing. They save humanity or a race, or they just save people that are innocent. So make the stakes, the innocents are the one. I mean, because we feel for the innocents as a general thing.
Yeah.
And yes, we want the heroes to save them, help the poor boy that's about to get ran over by a train or something, like, you know what I mean? But like, so that's what I think some of these big events do well, that they're like, oh, everybody's in trouble. It's the heroes that are supposed to save this. So that's cool. That's the stakes. That's all the stakes need to be.
I agree.
But when they have the heroes also dying with that, and we know they're coming back, it kind of makes the stakes a little less meaningful, I guess.
Well, but the stakes of the innocent bystanders, the world or whatever, those are real, but they're abstract. Like, they're not emotional for the reader.
Well, I don't think that tragedy is limited to death, is what I think Noah is saying. It's like, you can change the drama to where the ultimate consequence doesn't have to be the death of this character.
Yeah.
But what if it was the case that you knew beforehand that they wouldn't kill a character? So all your favorite characters go against world ender, but you know that they're not going to die.
Well, I know that's the case.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
that's what happens.
Yeah.
That's the issue of it, because they killed Flash. Yeah. He came back. He's died again. He's come back. I mean, Batman the same way. Superman the same way. Mm-hmm. Supergirl. I mean, you know what I mean? It's just, we know they're coming back. There's no way that they're going to.
So you prefer that if they were going to die, not come back?
Yeah. I mean, to a point. Like, of course, I'd be super upset if the Flash was no more. I mean, I'd be really sad. But I mean, that would make the death meaningful, I guess. Like, I mean, that would mean like, oh, now shit's real. Like, 'cause like,
and I feel like there's this thing in media in general. It's not comics exclusive, but that when an important character dies, it's not really dealt with properly by the people that they knew and loved, and by the world in general. It's just like, oh my God, he dead. And then next episode is either a time skip, or they're like, that was so sad. Can you believe he died? And then they just move on. I'm like, that's not how you deal with
you have
grief.
like Dick or Wally just putting on the dead person's costume and be like, well, I'm them now.
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
Oh, okay. Like that. And that's what I think, kind of talking about a crossover that's current that nobody knows what's going to happen with it, is the Heroes in Crisis. Like, I feel like something permanent might come from it only because they're really diving into the emotional stakes of how the characters deal with death and stuff like that. I really feel like something big might happen. I mean, we'll see, obviously.
It's interesting too. I listened to an interview recently with the I can't remember his name. Audience, let us know who it is. It's the guy who created Venom, the originator of that character. And he was talking about, and this blew my mind. He was like, because some people in the audience of the Q&A asked him, what do you think about current Spider-Man stories? And he's like, oh, I never read them. So what's interesting about that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it made me mad for a second because I was like, but he could tell you every single detail of what he wrote. And I think sometimes when these writers think about like the story they're doing where they have someone die, to them, Flash is dead. Flash is just dead forever because they don't care. I'm not saying all writers at this
but
way,
like that was the ending that they made for that character.
And so they don't feel responsible or even this guy aware of the kind of collective aggregate consequences of doing it. So for them, they wrote death because they meant it was permanent.
Right. But I mean, that's good. And I like that the writer kind of acknowledged like, yeah, this person's dead. He's dead in this one or whatever. But that's that writer's story.
Yeah.
And then you could have another person writing Venom where that's not the case. And I think that's when it does get confusing and kind of doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, the rest of us have to pick up the pieces.
The readers. Because you have writers that don't read everything.
And one of the crossovers we're going to talk about later is going to be heavily involved with death, so we can really
guess which one that is.
Yeah. Why do I keep
they all deal with death. Actually, they're all pretty.
So nice. The death of that sandwich you ate. So are there other criteria you guys feel like? So we're kind of on the fence about the idea of dying. I guess generally maybe they shouldn't die so much or take it more seriously. What else makes a good crossover? Like, what do you think works?
I mean, I said the stakes. I mean, I guess the meaning behind it has to be good. The deaths are kind of annoying. I don't know. I mean, just have a good team. Make it make sense with what the rest. I just don't. I like one shots. I like kind of side stories that don't affect the main continuity, but dive deeper into a character.
Sure.
But make it all together. Like, I just don't. I get really annoyed whenever there's something that's big and completely character changing that's in the main continuity, air quotes, but then it just doesn't affect anything else, or they just kind of write it out. Like, you'll read Trinity. And whatever happened to Batman, it's like it never happened. It's just like, well, it's the same character in the same universe. Like, how is this not happening?
Talk to each other, DC.
Yeah, like, I mean, I get that they write them at different times, and the whole creative teams are doing different things, but I mean, just talk to each other. Like, you have people doing this.
So I'm kind of glad you brought that up because I feel like there's this one of the big divisive ideas in crossovers now, in the contemporary crossover, is the problem or advantage of tie-ins. Because originally, if anything, I think before the 90s, crossovers were it's one linear story. It affects
like 15
all this
issues.
Kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly, or less, and it affects everything in the world to some degree. But that story is contained within those issues. Whereas now, when they do a crossover, the idea is you get. Okay, so I mean, if the story is Brightest Day, for instance, you have the main story, but then you have like Superman Brightest Day and Batman Brightest Day and all these, and it for a reader can feel really unruly. But there are advantages too. So how do you guys feel about that?
I think it kind of goes with one of my favorite things about crossovers is the build-up. So I feel like if those tie-ins are in separate issues, like Green Lantern, Batman, Superman, before the big crossover happens, I tend to like that better than, divergently, there's this one about Arkham. What's going on in Arkham during this time?
Yeah, I think, and recently with Dark Knight's Metal, I mean, I haven't read all of it because it wasn't that it was confusing when it all was coming out, because there's like 2 lead ups to it or something, like The Forge, The Casting, Dark Knight's Metal, but then you had these tie-ins happening at the same time as the main story.
Yeah.
And so going into the comic shop and seeing like, I really have to buy 6 issues now to understand what's going on, but the tie-ins happen either before or after the main story. That kind of irritates me, only because it's like, is that a cash grab? Or is it because you just...
I mean, part of it, for sure.
It's just, that's why I haven't read it yet. And they all finally came out, and trades and stuff like that. So I'm like, okay, now I'll start reading it. It's like,
cash grab or not, you mentioned that is, I think, good because trades, that's another thing they did, is save your ability to actually follow a storyline.
yeah.
One of the things I wanted to mention too that I think is crazy in the 90s, 80s, probably before crossovers were popular, but they did them to me in one of the worst ways where
single issue,
and they would jump from title to title. So it would be like, if it's a big cosmic story, it would be like, the first part is in Thor 389, and then the next part is in Silver Surfer 274, and before trades you had to hunt for these things and just ostensibly not read the story.
And it wasn't like they either came out at the same time or even the same month. And it is weird because they have done that too, where you'll have, like you said, so like say a story starts in Batman and then the next part jumps into Superman, but then that Batman line just continues with the story before that main crossover. So it's just all, that's what they did with CW, to be honest. So when I started watching, because I have really strong opinions about the CW universe, and I just started watching it just like, okay, whatever, I'll start watching it. I started liking some of it. But when they have their, no, I agree. I watch a lot of it with resentment.
It's a definition of a guilty pleasure for me.
Yes, it is. I feel guilty all the time watching. Anyway, no, they had a big event or a crossover in just smack dab in the middle of the main season storyline. And then the next episode just picked up before that. And I was like, wait, where's the rest of this story? And it's just different seasons and different episodes. I was like, oh, come on, guys. And they're named different. Like, it's not even like part 1 or part 2. It's like, oh, blah, blah, blah today. Blah, blah, blah tomorrow. I was like, what? How am I supposed to know this?
But I will say, thankfully, because of the proliferation of graphic novels and trades, at least you now have the promise that, okay, eventually the story will be compiled and I'll get to read it. Like I said, back in the day, you just had to be like, well, I hope the Hulk's head didn't fall off forever. I hope they all, because you didn't know they were going to get compiled.
What's going to happen with that?
Yeah. I agree.
So, Kayla, is there a thing that you really feel like in crossovers, like, this is what I want to see, this is what I look for? Or in the negative, is there something that you're like, I hate this?
I feel like if they can balance, because crossovers typically have a bigger ensemble cast than obviously any one of these single character issues. So I feel like balancing that is one of the things that I definitely look for in a good crossover. And it can be done poorly.
Like balancing all of the characters.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm
completely agree. And actually, if you think about it, outside, so it makes sense that you like that, I think, because you're coming from, I don't just like Batman.
Yeah.
Like, I like the Bat family.
Yeah, its entire cast.
and team books are like that. But crossovers are also a really good opportunity to sort of like, okay, this is a story about the world. So it's not about this one protagonist and what's going on, and all these other characters are just there to support them and let you know how fucking awesome Superman is or whatever. It's just about...
He rolled his eyes, guys.
Yeah. I like Superman, but we'll get to it. I have to say, too, and I think that to me this is the crucial thing about the success of a crossover, is the idea itself. Is the idea inspired? And we live in a time where crossovers are just like...
Sometimes twice a year.
Yeah. It's the summer, so we have to have a huge crossover.
Well, again, it kind of takes away from the build-up.
So much. When it feels like they just were like, we got to do one, so now let's figure out
what to do.
Especially to make them big, catastrophically universe events. It's like, I mean, they just dealt with this. Like, why
again?
Did they not?
How many times is the galaxy gonna explode?
Yeah, I mean, at some point, it's just a little ridiculous.
It reminds me of that SpongeBob meme. Like, how many times do I have to keep teaching you that same lesson, old man?
It's like the DC universe in this case is like an anthill that got knocked over, and you instantly have to rebuild.
Yep.
And the monitor's like, I just put the sun back. Are we seriously? But so the way I see it, and you guys, maybe this works or maybe it doesn't, let me know, is that you kind of have two different forms of inspired crossovers. You have the ones that are just based on a good idea. So we're going to get to that, obviously. But in other words, like, what if this happened? What if, let's say, all the villains fought or something like that, right? A little foreshadowing.
Spoiler.
But just comes out of basically a good idea. And then I think the other one is editorially oriented. So we have to fix, and I think this is going to parlay well into.
How dare you? Why? Why? We're about to get into it.
I know. Toss it to no.
Before we do, I just want to say, or they're trying to fix something about the thing. And so sometimes that means like streamlining.
Still pertains to mine.
Yeah. No, it does. I'm going to let you get into it. But before that specific one, there's just generally ones where, they've done this with the X-Men so many times where they're trying to fix weird timelines. It's basically the writers are like, look.
Have they, though?
They tried.
Tried.
But basically they're like the continuity's a mess, or things are confusing. Let's do a story that explains stuff, wraps it up. Or here's another one. And it happens to DC now a lot. Happens in Marvel, where they're like, we've got too much stuff going on generally. It's not confusing. It's just too much history. So let's just start it over. New 52 was an example of that, right?
Staring daggers at you because you're taking my talking points.
Oh, I don't know.
Talker points.
Tell me what your soccer points were going to be. So I didn't know. Yeah.
I think this is a good time to catch the ball, Noah. Kick us off into the first deep dive.
Yeah, so before we get into the ones we decided to talk about, I do want to say spoilers. If you haven't read them, sorry. You can still listen to it.
I don't know. Some of them are pretty old. If you haven't read them, then...
and that's kind of my defense too. It's like, this has been out for like 50 years. Like, you've probably heard of it. Like, you have no choice not to read it. It's free online, by the way. I mean,
the spoilers are what happened in all the comics you read.
Yeah,
exactly.
But just to say, because we do have some readers that have never read some of the stuff, there are spoilers in this. If you don't care about a 40-year-old comic being spoiled, listen on.
Also, these aren't our favorite crossovers necessarily. I think with these, it's important to point out, like, a lot of this stuff is like, we just think it exemplifies something interesting, and that's why we're talking about it.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a reason, I guess, for the ones we picked. But the one I was going to talk about is the start of all of it with DC. It's a Crisis on Infinite Earths, of course, by Marv Wolfman and George Perez, which is one of my favorite artists. He's great, and writers. But yeah, he's super great. So the reasoning behind this is purely editorial at the beginning. DC acquired all these different characters from all these different publications. So you had, Shazam came from a different one. You have Plastic Man from a different one, The Question, Blue Beetle, all of these characters, and they all had different Earths. Like they weren't in the main, Golden Age or Silver Age or anything like that. They weren't part of it. So the first kind of instance people started realizing there were different Earths or universes was Flash of Two Earths. Yay! My favorite character happened to be the one that introduced the multiverse, which makes sense. And so it was just confusing everybody. There was so many different characters and different Earths, and that didn't happen, and this was happening. I mean, you had the Crime Syndicate on a different Earth that was just evil Justice League. But anyway, and also Batman was on the verge of being canceled. It just wasn't doing well. Yeah. There couldn't have been a Batman, guys. But yeah, so they decided, like, hey, we need to get something to fix all this stuff. Cause you even had Wonder Girl. So Wonder Girl now in the comics is in Teen Titans. It's either like Donna Troy or, any of them.
Troy.
Love Donna Troy.
Me too.
That's her song.
But in the beginning, she was just young Wonder Woman. Like, that's who she was. She was Diana. That's who she was. And then for some weird reason, a writer put her in Teen Titans. So you had young Wonder Woman and older Wonder Woman happening at the same time with no explanation.
That's fine.
Yeah, so obviously there was some issues that were going on, and DC was like, all right, we need to stop and start over, and we need to fix this. So that was one of the things that we kind of talked about earlier that is an issue, or a reason why they do crossovers is they need to fix stuff. And that's kind of where Crisis on Infinite Earths. Sorry, spoiled the next one.
Don't get those confused.
Yeah, and so, I mean, the whole gist of it is you have all these universes and these parallel Earths, and you have a good universe, the positive, matter universe, and then you have the anti, which is the negative one. So you have this guy that's kind of the protector of the universe, which is Monitor. That's his name. I guess it's because he monitors them. Like, it's such a weird villain name or a hero name or whatever. And then you have the inverse of him, the Anti-Monitor. and they're always fighting. They're constantly at this like weird like stalemate, and that stalemate breaks. And Monitor, what does he do? I'm gonna destroy everything. Like that's what else would a villain do? And
our heroes don't know about any of this.
No,
This is,
no,
like,
because it's cosmic.
off
Like
in the
this is
sky.
this is happening in a weird form of space and stuff. So he starts destroying everything, and Monitor's like, "Oh, we can have this." So he just essentially starts pulling heroes from different Earths. Hence, this is them trying to bring them all together.
Super cool.
Yeah, and they try to bring them all together. And one of the funniest things about this is that you have these heroes that were pulled together and then put on these 5 Earths. It's 5, right? I think.
Towards the
So
yeah.
they put them on the last standing Earths that were happening. And then you have the villains that are like all together, and they're like, "Oh, we're still going to do villainy things and try to see what's happening. Oh, there's heroes. Let me fight them." It's just such a weird thing that happens in this comic.
But it's DC had a huge jump on Marvel in a certain way because I think that they right out of the gate, they were like, our villains are interesting unto themselves.
Yeah.
We can put them over here and kind of tell our villain
will
story
still
too.
care.
And people are really into it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of also where the birth of like, oh, we want to see like a villain team. Like, where is this villain team? It's really cool to see them interact. I just thought it was really funny that you have the heroes doing something and the villains doing kind of the same thing. Yeah, and then they start fighting, and they're like, "Wait, everything's about to die. Maybe we should join forces." Like,
It might be I said this before, the birth of the Lex Luthor Brainiac man crush.
Oh my gosh.
There are panels in this comic where it's like, yeah, we'll have the bad guys and the heroes fight, and then that'll give us time to make out.
yeah, I mean, so the whole synopsis, like, I don't want to do a huge deep dive to it because there's a lot of exposition in this comic. I would recommend reading it just to understand where the birth of the multiverse came from, or the thing that kind of explained it and made everything kind of centralized into one single Earth. And there's tons of death.
That's one of the things it's known for.
Yeah, there's so much death, so many big characters. When I was talking about the Flash in the earlier episode, and I talked about his death, it's from this comic.
Those panels are freaking disturbing.
Yeah,
too.
it's so sad because he gets kidnapped by the Anti-Monitor, and so there's this character called Psycho Pirate, and that name is outrageous. He's not a pirate.
He's fantastic.
No, I love Psycho Pirate. It's just such a weird name.
Yeah.
He looks cool
Because
too.
he pillages your feelings.
Oh my god.
Oh,
He's like the reverse of a therapist.
Did you just have an aha moment?
Yeah, he's the anti-therapist.
I retract my statement. His name makes sense now.
He is one of the most original.
We're learning
characters.
live.
Yeah.
He's one of the most original characters in comic books.
Yeah, his whole ability is he can change and manipulate people's emotions. And Anti-Monitor uses that to a universal scale. And it happens, Barry Allen gets kidnapped by him. Barry Allen has this cool interaction with Psycho Pirate, knocks him out. And then Barry Allen runs around this core of this weapon that the Anti-Monitor's having and dies.
Gives a speech about hope while he's slowly disintegrating.
And he...
Kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah, well, and the cool thing that happens in that moment is, so you have all these heroes from different Earths on doing different things, split up into different teams. You have like Batman over here, the Superman over here, and while Flash is running around that, he pops up near them in different like kind of pockets in different times because everything's jumbled. Time, space, everything's all jumbled because things are crashing into each other. But yeah, the whole thing of Crisis on Infinite Earths was just to kind of streamline everything, to bring these characters that were from different publications to make it make sense. I mean,
You think it worked?
Yeah. I mean, with the exception of like killing off big characters that just left for a long time. So you have the Flash, Supergirl dies in it, which was a big moment because you have the Superman fighting and Supergirl, and you see this really cool moment where she's like the last super standing, and then she ends up dying because of it. But, you know, it just kind of proves that, yeah, she's just as good as, you know, this Superman, that Superman, and all the other ones. Yeah, I think it did a good job.
By the way, that moment is fantastic.
Like the scene of him.
Supergirl,
Yeah.
and the Flash, when you mention these two. And I think that's another thing that crossovers, especially in posterity, need to have, which is not just that they're interesting stories that bring everything together. They need to have these moments that really are just sort of feel big and in this case, like haunting. And
like
stuff
iconic
like that.
moments where the heroes really take a stand.
Iconic is a great, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the one image that I always think about with that one, aside from Flash dying, is Superman holding Supergirl. Is it's such, and I think, and I feel like they kind of played like homage to it with the death of Superman, with Lois kind of holding Clark.
Yeah.
So it was kind of the reverse, but I mean, that's just such an iconic image. I mean, Alex Ross did this huge, big kind of spread of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and it shows all the different characters. It's really good. We'll have it on the blog because I love that image so much.
It feels like to me you can't overstate what it must have been like for comic fans to be reading this story when it was getting published, because it's like we talk about The Walking Dead now, like you don't know who's going to die.
Yeah,
they killed Flash and they killed Supergirl. And
those are just the standout mentions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Universes worth of people were.
Yeah. I mean, tons and millions and billions of people died in this one. I mean, this body count is, I don't even think you could count it.
And if you can kill those two characters, they're really outside of maybe Batman and Superman. And I don't even really know this status at the time. I mean, you mentioned that Batman might have not.
Yeah, he wasn't doing good.
So him dying, the editorial staff, very much. So this is, I think, I mean, and they didn't have this history of comics where they bring back people from the dead.
Yeah, if I was reading it when it was coming out, I probably would have
cried.
Yes, lost my mind because it's like, how
because that's
dare
your
you?
fave.
Yeah, and I think we're a little spoiled now. And
he was dead for 20 years.
Oh yeah,
a long
or
time.
More.
Like you had Wally, but like it's Barry. I mean, if you grew up reading that, or if that was your favorite character, and to just have him gone. I mean, especially for Supergirl to die. I mean, she was. A lot of people were just like, oh, they just wanted to make Superman a woman. But she rightfully came into her own. I mean, people really saw her as she doesn't need Superman. She's just part of his family, literally. But, and then just to kill her off, I think that was a huge kind of gut punch to a lot of people.
It might have been like, I'm killing this character, so I'm going to give her a really great send off.
Yeah, and I think they did.
She almost beats him.
By herself.
Yeah.
I mean, they all weakened him, but she almost beat him. And I think that was a huge moment for that character, and I guess fans in general, that were advocating for her, and a lot of people were just like, she's just a girl Superman.
Yeah.
You'll probably appreciate this because people have criticized Man of Steel so much for the collateral damage. You want to talk about collateral damage? I mean, so there's universes dying in this. It's kind of
multiple,
almost off panel, but then people are getting killed consistently.
Yeah, they kind of show what's happening when they're on those different Earths, but like to really just think about it, like to step back and be like, oh, there's only 5 left of so many different ones. So it's, I mean, just to put that into scale. And also, I mean, that kind of stake for the first one to be like, no, universes are dying. Like, I mean, just all of these things are dying. I mean, I just think that was just a huge jump from bank robber to big cosmic beings eating worlds. Like,
and to compare the two, we not totally, but Secret Wars came out. This comes out. They're contemporaries. I mean, Secret Wars has some bad moments, but it feels like a romp. It's very much Marvel movies now versus DC movies, because Infinite Crisis is a absolute tragedy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a beautiful story, and it's probably why it's resonated, I think, more than Secret Wars in a lot of ways.
You mean Crisis on Infinite Earth?
Yeah, sorry, what did I say?
You said Infinite Crisis.
Oh, yeah.
Which we're all the sequel.
Don't get it twisted.
But yeah, Crisis on Infinite Earths is just, it resonates because it's so tragic and dark.
And I mentioned
so much.
Yeah, I mentioned there was a lot of exposition, and it needed to have that. I mean, reading crossovers now, you have these big splash panels and these huge moments a lot throughout it. But back then, they kind of needed to explain, like, what
story?
Yeah, what is a different universe? Well, and they kind of really go into it, but it just laid the groundwork. They had to do some kind of like world building or destroying in this to kind of make it make sense and why they were doing it.
There's also, I know this isn't a proper review in a sense. Is there anything we want to say about this that we don't like or that didn't work or anything like that?
I think to what I just said, like with all the exposition, I think there's too much, but I think that's because we're a little spoiled on that.
Yeah.
But literally, Psycho Pirate says a line that sums up pretty much the entire story. He's like, worlds live, worlds die, nothing will ever be the same.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, that's how it is. Like, I mean, that's the entire story. I mean, you have this whole thing with Pariah and Harbinger, and you have that really cool story, which both of them are awesome characters that don't really exist anymore. But yeah, I mean, that sums up the whole story. I get why it has to be so long, but also it's just like, ooh, rereading this was a chore.
Oh, man. A lot of moving pieces in this.
Yes.
A lot of people in and out. They feel very brief at times.
And some that are so old, like that are, or even just look different that you're like, wait, who is that? Why does Nightwing look like that?
Starfire. What are you wearing?
On a technical end, I will say, just as a compliment, George Perez's art is not just great, but it's perfect for this, because he has a tendency in scale to always have his characters sort of small.
Yeah.
In a weird way, like they'll have his panels often have a lot of characters, and you get their whole sort of body and
his art style is very dense.
Yes, and for that, I mean, there's just these like I don't know, like panels where it feels like there's 1,000 characters in it,
which there are.
But you feel it almost feels crowded in a good way. Like the way he does, his style is so good.
Like it doesn't look bad. It doesn't look muddied or anything like that. No, but he does a good job with that.
I was going to say, flipping through, I'm kind of an art snob. So I was like, this is so old looking. But then, I mean, for the time, it was great.
Yeah. And I think that is what kind of makes it not necessarily hard. I want to sound like a brat or anything like that. But like I said, I mean.
Oh, come on. We're all snobby about certain things. I just jumped up.
I mean, I appreciate the meaning and the reason behind it. And this is what gave birth to all the crises that happened after this.
Crises?
I think it's crises.
Crises. Yeah. I like the way it sounds. But that's what kind of gave birth to it. And I do like how DC kind of uses that as like the crisis phrasing as their big, like, shit's changing. Stuff is happening.
Wee woo, wee woo.
Yeah.
Pay attention.
Yeah. And I like how they do that, because it's always calling back to the first thing that was so big. And that probably actually saved DC. I mean, and a lot of these characters, because they brought them all together. They made people emotionally feel for this in a way they hadn't before. And just changed the entire landscape and how comics kind of did crossovers and how big events happened.
To me, it's fair to say that this is the beginning of the DC universe.
Well, literally.
As we know it.
It was a publishing house before where characters might be involved, but this was really just saying they're all here together. And this is its cosmology. So that's another cool thing about this, is that it's not just like, oh, they're all together, but like this is the structure of the DC universe. And I think that's really cool too.
To help differentiate between all the crises, there's always something like there's 3 points for Crisis on Infinite Earth that I think back to, and it's the high death count, man.
Yeah.
Especially Supergirl and Barry Allen, but the high death count, and then the fact that it's credited with kind of ushering in the large scale crossover for Marvel and DC. It kind of just popularized it and made it like, look, you can do it well.
Yeah.
And then also what helps me differentiate it is Wolfman is the Anti-Monitor. Because he hated the multiverse so badly that he was like, I'm going to write a comic in which the multiverse is destroyed. He is the Anti-Monitor, guys.
That's actually a good point. Like, I mean, I guess I never really thought about it that way, because there is a strong sense in there that he really did not like what was happening with DC Comics or comics in general. He's like, why can't they all just be in one area?
We need to streamline this.
Yes. So the Anti-Monitor's the good guy?
From the author's point of view, maybe you can make that argument.
In a weird way, yes, because he saved fans from being utterly confused about all of this stuff. So, I mean, in a weird way, yes, you have Monitor and Pariah and Harbinger and all of them and the heroes and villains that were technically the protagonists in the story, but it's kind of like the Thanos effect, like what they did in the movie, where it's like, that's a whole nother thing. But I mean, you can see why it makes sense looking back. Like, yes, we need to streamline all this stuff. It needs to not be confusing. And that's what they did.
So it basically was effective then, because even though it does have a few consequences that, it doesn't fix everything, and some characters die, and then maybe that's unfortunate.
Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult because part of me is like, well, what about the 20 years that Flash wasn't there that would have, what awesome stories. He killed for a time the engine of amazing stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
but also paved way for a lot of them.
Absolutely. And yeah, we got, 5 confusing, who knows what's going on universes into one major
confusing
universe. Yeah.
I'd rather be confused once instead of 5 times.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Crisis on Infinite Earth.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I mean, nutshell. Yeah, Crisis on Infinite Earth, that's all you need to know. DC was in trouble. Really confusing. Let's destroy everything, make it streamlined. And that's kind of what gave birth to big events, big crossovers. The Crisis or Crisis?
I'm pretty sure it's Crisis.
Whatever you guys said. But yeah, that's it. Yeah, and now next to Jared.
Which crossover did you choose?
Blackest Night.
I love.
So good. Right?
Love it.
Yeah,
it's one of the first ones I remember getting in DC. It was like Blackest Night. And who knows? Maybe that's why I was able, as a Marvel fanboy, to be like, no, this is really good stuff. I had read DC Comics before anyway. But okay, if you have never read Blackest Night, it basically goes something like this. After the War of Light, and this is basically, I think we talked about it on the last episode, actually, all these different lantern corps, like the Green Lantern, have popped up, Red Lanterns, Yellow Lanterns, all that kind of stuff.
Introduction of color.
Absolutely. And if you know, if you can recite the Green Lantern, what is it, motto?
The Oath.
The Oath.
How dare you?
The motto.
It's always a motto to me.
They're not a football team.
But it's in Brightest Day and Blackest Night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those that worships evil might beware my power, Green Lantern light. Yeah, so I know it.
I love it. I always feel the call to action whenever I hear it. It gives me chills.
It start getting built up with like, ooh, who am I going to fight?
It's so comic-y too, because it's like corny, but if you let yourself,
Just
if you let it
feel
into your heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's okay. So exploiting that, this is the story of the Blackest Night. A character named Black Hand sets in motion, because of he has a relationship with Necron, who's essentially like the god of death.
Yeah.
They create their own Lantern Corps, and it sends out these black rings that basically possess all of the dead characters in the DCU, all the major ones at least, and it turns them into zombies. And they all essentially attack the rest of the living heroes, because Necron's job as death itself is to just end all life.
Yeah, it's like Doomsday Prepper's worst nightmare.
Exactly.
Like superhero zombies.
Yeah. So exactly. And it's so interesting that you mentioned the zombie aspect, because it really, this functions in a certain way like a horror movie.
Oh, yes.
I mean, or horror
Just
comic.
even looking at some of the panels, it's like, ugh.
There's so much I want to say about this, but yeah, it's absolutely, there are some really shocking deaths in this. The Hawk couple.
Yeah.
I don't know what to call not Hawk family, Hawkman and Hawkgirl.
Oh, okay. I was like, Hawk and Dove?
Are very early just brutally killed by the zombies of Elongated Man and Sue Dibney, his wife. And just from there, it's like, okay, this is going to be really sort of terrifying. And it's the living comic book characters trying to figure a way to put an end to it. And you get some amazing moments in this because of this.
Oh, yes.
And what I really love about this, by the way, is this is, to me, Jeff Johns. This is him doing what he did for the comic, for DC in general. He's a writer who made his bones on bringing things back to life.
Yeah. and doing it great.
Absolutely.
In a really good way.
Absolutely. So a lot of this crossover, we've talked about death and crossovers. That's what this is really about, which is you see, oh my God, how many people have died, how many heroes have died. They have a wonderful moment where in the beginning, because this, I will say, as much as an ensemble cast as this is, the kind of two characters that get the most protagonisty attention are Barry and Hal, the two characters that Jeff just brought back to life. And there's a scene where Hal is showing Hal is showing Barry how many just how many dead people there are.
Yeah.
How many heroes they've
Which
lost.
there's a lot.
So many. Yeah. And
they're I just did want to say, like, they are my favorite relationship in comic, like the buddy cop, no pun intended, because they're both cops.
Yes.
But I love it. Like, they even have their own runs a lot of the time. So I loved how this huge Green Lantern event started with both of them. Like, I like it.
Another thing I like about this, and I have to say, this is maybe a little selfish, is that this decentralized the DCU in a certain way, where it real like Jeff Johns made Green Lantern in kind of the center of DC Comics. Like, a lot of the events that were coming out really kind of dealt with their mythology, and all the other characters are included, of course. But I've always liked when it gets opened up a bit, and DC is not just about Batman and Superman.
They kind of made him cool again. Like, I mean, he was just this weird character in the background that would come around every now and then, and they really, I mean, thanks to him, like, he's, back in the front and center.
Thanks, Hal.
No, it's fantastic. And also, you really get, I mean, like I said, I wanted to mention this earlier, Jeff Johns and Ivan Reis. Like, this might be my favorite creative team in comics.
Mm-hmm. Flipping through the pages, the art is gorgeous.
It's so pretty.
It's so colorful.
And I've said this before too. I don't know that there's a better, like, comics don't generally have this sort of metaphorical thing that they're playing off. They usually have a theme that they create stories according to. But, like, to me, this is actually Jeff Johns kind of dealing with death as a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do we do that? Look how many people we've killed. Look how many characters are dead. And how do we bring them back without making it all
weird
and futile and useless and stuff like that? And I think a lot of the Flash, like, picks it up by suggestions like, yeah, they're dead, but we're always going to have hope that they return.
No.
Yeah.
He's always so hopeful.
Yeah.
Like that. That's why I love him so much.
So it's, in a way, I think, from a writer standpoint, really smart, because he both spends so much time getting you to understand exactly how awful these deaths are. He talks about Coast City when Cyborg Superman and Mongol killed that. It's one of the things that drove Hal Jordan crazy in the first place and embraced Parallax. And you were like, oh yeah, they had a Holocaust. They had a 9/11 times, I don't do math, but a lot. But also, this is comic books, and we know that our heroes are coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And
sometimes in a scary way.
yeah, absolutely. And they're literally defying death. Like, Necron is trying to end everything. And then the other thing about this crossover that I think is really good is that it has real consequences. Like, at this point, you realize just how many particular characters had been dead, and this brings a lot of them back. So John Jones, the Martian Manhunter, Aquaman, the Elongated Man, Ronnie Raymond, the original Firestorm, all these characters had just been dead. Mm-hmm. Also, Zoom was dead at this point. He's brought back here. What's that?
He could stay dead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He's awful.
And we also find out, again, this is, I guess, double spoilers. At this point, we all thought Batman had died because this is post Final Crisis. Mm-hmm. And in this, we find out, oh no, that wasn't really his corpse.
Yeah.
So this is also announces in a certain way, oh, Batman's coming back.
Yeah.
Because
at the beginning, someone picks up his skull right from his grave.
Yeah. It's super smart, by the way, because so Black Hand is sort of the initiator of this, you think. Mm-hmm. He's the one that sort of starts all the rings coming back. He's in some way in the center of this, but you're not really sure how. And then we find out Necron is behind it all, the big avatar of death. And you don't know why that's happening. And it felt like bad writing. And then they explain it just towards the end that Black Hand was the avatar. He was like the familiar for Necron, and he starts it all or whatever. So it's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a really cool thing that happens in there too, is that so the heroes that died come back, and the heroes that are alive that have died also get affected.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's a really cool thing, because they acknowledge, like, yeah, these people have died many times, and you're affected too because you have been dead before. And so I think it really does play into
that's absolutely a good point. There's a moment, it's a great moment. There's a few ones in here. There's a great moment where all the characters, as you were saying, that had been died are susceptible to Necron's control. But then it also becomes why they can defy it as well. And that's a great moment. There's another thing that's so cool in this crossover that really has nothing to do with anything besides this wonderful little moment. But we find out, and almost nakedly from Jeff Johns, like, I don't have a reason to do this, guys, but this is going to be really cool. Where in times of great crisis, the rings of any group, any corps, any different color lantern corps, they can double their own rings and deputize another member.
That's so cool.
So you kind of say it as like, oh, there's no reason, but that is the reason alone is so cool.
I feel like it's such a fan servicey thing.
It's like break glass in case of emergency, like double yourself ring.
So Ganthet starts the process, and
who is Ganthet?
Oh, sorry, Ganthet. That is a good point. He's one of the main guardians. The guardians being the sort of like immortal, imp-looking, powerful creatures, who created who harnessed the emotional power and created the Green Lantern Corps. But anyway, so Ganthet's one of the main ones, and he initiates the change in all the different rings. So even the characters like the Red Lantern Corps, the Rage Corps, the leader Atrocitus, who would never do that, doesn't get a choice. That just the ring spawns a second copy and just find somebody else. And they really pick smart characters, and it's just fun to see. So if we can do it real quick, the Blue Lantern Corps, which is Hope, is Barry.
Of course.
It's so fantastic. It's such a great moment. And also it's cool because he was really important to the story up until this pivotal moment, which is close to the end. So it feels very like it happened. The Atom is the Indigo Lantern, the Lanterns of Compassion. Mira is the gets the red ring because she's filled with rage, which was interesting because it was kind of latent. You can see it in retrospect. I wouldn't have thought of her as like a super angry character, but you can definitely see it. Like
I don't think it's necessarily anger. I think it's just more how much passion she has, especially for the Atlanteans.
Are they the rings of passion?
In a sense, I mean,
a rage of passion. Get it?
It's like her passion, when it gets out of control, manifests in anger, and she is short tempered. Like when in the Jeff Johns run, the Aquaman run, it's her like, we can't murder these cops because they think you're weird.
Could have just put like Grundy or something. That would have been cool.
But I like that they kind of. It wasn't the direct thing you'd think or something like that. The immediate thing. Who else do we have?
Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman is the violet core. Yeah, she looks pink. It's supposedly violet for love because she's a great paragon of love, and that's also deep in her history.
Of course.
Yeah.
The wonderful villains get chosen too. The orange light of avarice, which is, if you know his Greek, is Lex Luthor because he wants it all. And then who are you going to pick for fear?
Batman.
Yeah, exact. No. In this case, it wasn't Batman. It was Scarecrow.
Oh yeah.
And
was it?
Yeah. So Batman has been selected as a Yellow Lantern before, but remember Batman's dead at this point.
Oh yeah.
Or they think he's dead. He's out of the picture, and so you get. Scarecrow deputized as a Yellow Lantern, and he enjoys it so much. There's one point where somebody's like, "Oh, he seems to enjoy it," and
I mean,
that's his thing.
No, someone is saying another character, I can't remember who, is enjoying it, and Crane is like, "Not more than me."
Oh,
fly my monkeys. He has a moment where he says, "Fly my monkeys."
Fear is his thing.
Yes. So I think I got all of them right. That's all the.
I mean, the ones that kind of stand out. Yeah, but I mean, that is such a cool moment that you have like. Oh, to defeat this huge, Black Lantern Corps, all the heroes need to become lanterns as well, and they also have their powers. So, I mean, they're just kind of amplified at this point.
So I think not important for the structure of the story, but such a cool, memorable moment. And so this definitely has that in spades. These like really just awesome.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the importance of this one was to kind of realize like, hey, a lot of people have died. We're going to bring some of them back because, I mean, why should they stay dead? I guess. But it was done in such a good way. It was executed so well. And the story's fantastic.
Out of all of the ones that we've chosen, I think that Blackest Night has the best story.
Yeah. Well, one that makes sense too.
Exactly. And like the impending fear that builds with like every character that falls becomes one of theirs. It's just.
Yeah. Zombies, man.
Yeah. This story has, probably so many tie-ins that they did, but they managed to sort of allow the main story to be really solid and well done. I have to admit, there's a few things that when I went back and read this, I didn't realize wasn't in this. It was in some of the tie-ins. So one of the first fight scenes, I guess, in this story is Barry and Hal versus the corpse of Martian Manhunter.
Yes.
That gets fleshed out in the Green Lantern comic book in one of the tie-ins, and I gotta say it's one of my favorite. The corpse of John Jones to me might be cooler than Martian Manhunter himself. But no, he's great. I'm just saying it's an awesome. There's a moment where they are re-surprised at how powerful Martian Manhunter is.
Yeah, I mean,
he's lifting a building. He's like, yeah, why does everybody forget I'm as powerful as Superman? He actually
because
says
everybody does forget that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's great. And then I guess the last thing I'll just say is that another cool thing about this, which maybe not so necessary for all crossovers, but it is a cool thing, is that a lot of characters come back from the dead, but a lot don't, and it opens this mystery for the next big event, which is The Brightest Day, which I have not read yet, and this reading this has inspired me to go read it. I can't wait.
Dare you?
No, really, and we'll talk about it later.
Inspired though.
Yeah, that's true.
Exactly. And yeah, so I think it's really cool that this didn't say, "Oh, we're gonna just end all." Like, this is the end of the story. It sort of opens up a new one as well. So that's really cool.
And I think that the reason why they kind of didn't let a lot of them come back, because a lot of them did eventually come back, but it was kind of like, hey, remember me? Like, this character's still kind of here, but dead. And I kind of think it made people excited just to even see some of those characters that weren't around anymore.
One of the things that stands out when I think of Blackest Night is I think it's when Necron is killed, quote, quote. And then a random Black Lantern picks up the Sai. And then death cannot be stopped.
Yeah.
I was like,
No, it's horrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a good moment. I forgot about that moment.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, by the way, this is never going to
yeah,
stop.
I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
One of Jeff Johns' talents is, away from just bringing back characters that were forgotten, he will take a character that is really like a B character at best and elevate them amazingly, proving that it really is
the writing.
Absolutely. Because Black Hand was a pretty dismissible character.
Yeah, who?
Yeah, exactly. And moreover, I looked it up. Necron was barely in comics before this. He was
this
never...
weird, ambiguous kind of entity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Jeff Johns makes him this, what feels like an Anti-Monitor level threat. As a matter of fact, the Anti-Monitor makes an appearance at the end of this. The Anti-Monitor was the inside of the Black Lantern, in some sense powering this. So this relaunches him. And I guess the light entity is introduced in this. It's important.
Oh, the White Lantern?
The White Lantern entity.
Isn't it Kyle Rayner becomes the White Lantern, right?
No. Well, a lot of characters do. Sinestro does in this. A lot of people take on that sort of power.
Which, can I say, Sinestro looks really weird in all white.
Yeah,
that magenta skin
white and magenta
does not.
He's a spring. He's not an autumn. I have no idea what that means. But anyway, and I guess the only reason I bring it up is you find out that Death has trapped this life entity, and there's real stakes here. And there's a moment where Necron puts his Black Lantern scythe into the entity and it screams, where I hurt a little bit. It was actually pretty terrifying. And
I mean, it's like somebody torturing a helpless kind of animal or something, you know. It's just like, oh, why? Like
God, if God was a baby. Like, if God was a cute, and that's basically what happens, is that you're like, God is a cute puppy and the devil is putting a cigarette out in its nose.
Oh my gosh.
I'm saying that's bad.
This is like the third time we've said something about Jesus.
Yeah.
Just we're Jesus is cool.
We can, I don't want to hurt him at all.
Oh my god!
I'm saying no. Okay, that's Blackest Night, and those are the reasons we picked it. I think it's a great crossover. Which did you pick, Kayla?
I did Forever Evil because I felt like it was a good compliment and it offered angles that we hadn't talked about with the other crossovers. So just a brief premise of what Forever Evil is. It's 3 Justice League teams in the New 52, the Justice League of America, Justice League Dark, are dead, quote. And the Crime Syndicate from Earth 3, which is like the evil Justice League from there, take over Earth Prime. And so Lex Luthor kind of gathers up some villains to fight the Crime Syndicate and forms the Injustice League. It's written by Jeff Johns, again, Blackest Night guy.
It's like he's good at writing or something.
I know, right? It's like we're drawn to good guys that write.
That guy's gonna go places.
The art's by David Finch, which rereading, I love it even more than I remember. The art was so good. But it was the first kind of line-wide crossover in the New 52. And the different thing that kind of offers is that it focuses on villains. Like, it's not an ensemble cast of heroes faces this great evil. It's villains versus villains.
Yeah. It's such a cool point of view.
Yeah.
I loved it.
And I think making Lex Luthor the main focus of Forever Evil was smart, because I feel like there's certain villains' heads you don't want to get into. Lex Luthor's, though, because of the way he thinks. He's very logical. It makes sense to follow him throughout the story. But yeah, it's Forever Evil.
And I like the Crime Syndicate a lot. I think they're not just cheap ripoffs of the main heroes.
That's a great point.
They really stand on their own, because you have Ultraman, which is Superman technically, Superwoman, which is Wonder Woman, but she's very much just like Superman.
Yeah.
And then you have Johnny Quick, which is Flash. Owlman, I guess he had to be some type of winged creature.
I actually really like it. It was a nocturnal predator.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I was going to say, like, why an owl?
They eat bats. That was intentional. Yeah.
Yikes.
So, like, an owl didn't fly into his living room at night, and he's like, "Rah, owl man, fight!"
Well, you guys saw that documentary, The Stairs, where that lady died,
yeah.
and they think an owl killed her.
Really?
Yeah,
because it clutched in her palm was like small owl feathers.
Yeah.
I didn't finish that.
And they think that
spoiler.
So Owlman killed her.
They still that owl was from another dimension. It could not be trusted.
Yeah, but and then they have this kind of neat character, Atomica, which she's really cool. She shrinks. Stuff,
so it's that Atom.
Really, yeah, she's Atom, but a woman and
also powering for Green Lantern.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of the major ones.
Yeah,
that is the Crime Syndicate. Those are the ones that come to this Earth and they kill all the Justice League, supposedly. You know, I mean,
they're gone.
Yeah, but like you said, I mean, it's really cool to see villains kind of, especially Lex and like him forming his own little Injustice League.
Yeah,
and being like, we don't want to die either. So
or give up their power.
This is our place to be bad.
Yeah, I mean,
go back to Earth 3, Crime Syndicate.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. And you have this really there's a thing that happens with superhero groups where you kind of see how they interact. They might get at each other's throat every now and then, but they're always nice to each other.
Yeah,
but you have villains having to work together that usually never work together. So just seeing that interaction is really interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of like, I hate you, Black Manta, but goddamn do I respect you.
Yeah.
That's my favorite type.
Yeah, I think elegance in its simplicity too, the idea of this. This is I think of it just because I guess I come from a Marvel-y place. A marvelous place. That this is like the inverse of Civil War. So if Civil War was like, oh, what if the heroes had a conflict where they had to fight? And but DC's like,
what if the villains did though?
And let's just they're both great in their own ways, but this is more fun.
I think out of all the crossovers we kind of picked or could have picked, this is one that's just kind of like a fan servicey favorite.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's not about the heroes. I mean, Batman's around, of course.
Well, Batman, Catwoman, and Cyborg come back.
Yeah, and they're helping with the villains.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, of course, why not Batman? He's the one that always seems to survive.
I don't know. Still, one of my favorite parts of Forever Evil is when Batman is working with Lex and like they're fighting their mutual enemy, but he's monologuing the whole time, going like, "Don't forget, Lex, I'm gonna put you back where you belong after we're done working together. I won't forget what you've done." Yeah,
it's such a weird and cool like relationship.
There's so much alike.
Yeah.
They are two characters who probably if they had different styles, they could be the other one. If Lex wanted to be one of the greatest martial artists, he could have. He's just that smart.
He's very disciplined.
Yeah.
I think also with Forever Evil, there are standout moments that just like pop in your memory when you think back. Obviously, Dick Grayson's reveal to the world to be Nightwing was one of mine.
Yeah, and like literally in front of all the villains that are on that Earth.
Yeah, I know. my favorite part was Riddler was like, "Who's that?"
Like, are we supposed to care like who Dick Grayson is? And who's the one that puts it together that Bruce is the one that
I think it might be Lex at the end.
Yeah, I think somebody puts it together like, if Dick Grayson is Nightwing, that means Batman's Bruce.
And all of his adopted sons must be the other Robin.
Which brings me to my point that we had talked about in the last episode. Why do they not just realize, the amount of Robins or the amount of kids that Bruce Wayne has?
It's the equivalent.
It's because he just makes that like so anti-Batman that you're like
his Brucey Wayne persona. They're like, no, not that guy.
It'd be like if Jeff Bezos, you found out he was like fighting crime. He's like, no, he's not.
There is when you brought up those two, there's a really good moment when whatever's happened, the murder machine, like Dick Grayson's inside.
Those panels are some of my favorites.
Yeah, and you have Lex and Batman. So Lex knows how to save Dick, which means killing him.
Yeah.
And Batman obviously is super emotional and stressful.
Like, you just murdered my favorite son.
Yeah, and the whole time Lex is like, calm down, man. Like,
okay, but to be fair, Lex could have explained the whole plan before being like, I'm going to just smother your son for a second, okay? Just give me a moment. He's going to die.
But he's so arrogant that he's like, you should all trust whatever I'm doing.
I should not have to explain.
If I'm murdering your child, I have a good reason.
Yeah, and so see, this is why this crossover is great, because you have moments like that where it's just like, I guess,
Lex.
like what would the villains do to try to save the world? Smother children.
You were big on mentioning wish fulfillment.
Yes.
This is, to me, a certain kind of dark wish fulfillment. Okay, it's like Wile E. Coyote, where he gets stopped so many times. Part of you is like, I just want to see him get the goddamn thing. And in this, you have the crime syndicate, which is basically like just they allowed there to be a JLA or Justice League where the bad guys get to kill them in a certain way.
Yeah.
And there's also this weird Jerry Springer element to this story.
I'm so glad you brought this up.
This is a new one to me. What is this?
Superwoman's drama. The whole I'm pregnant with your baby, Owlman.
Yeah, she tells.
And then I'm pregnant with your baby, Ultraman. Jinx! It was like Alexander Jr.'s the whole time.
Yeah, Alexander Luthor Jr.'s the whole time.
But this just implies that she's sleeping with all of these people.
Because nobody denies it.
Yeah, they were like, that makes sense. I don't know. I felt like that was kind of unnecessary.
Yeah,
all of that.
Yeah, and you just have this weird drama with that. I mean, it's kind of, I guess, they had to build some weird tension between the group, so that's why they did it. But I mean, the big reveal at the end is Alexander Luthor, and that he is their Shazam from their universe. Yeah. So I bet he has to say the name backwards, so it's like Mazam or
Mazaz.
Mazaz.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
It's weird too. He has the, I don't know how this is incorporated, but he has the power. He has the powers of the people he's killed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't know if that's how he has Shazam's power specifically or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember the logistics behind that. But yeah, I mean, the climactic, pretty much ending behind that is Lex Luthor is fighting his doppelganger that is Mazaz or Shazam, whatever, from that universe. And since Lex is him, he can say the word, and that essentially just makes him turn back into Alexander Luthor. So,
Right before he does that, Alexander Luthor kills Bizarro. Which is, that sound is the correct sound.
Can you explain the whole Bizarro, like just kind of their relationship in this comic?
I mean, again, I think Jared was mentioning earlier, it's kind of like a Frankenstein and, this
creator
monster. And it is really sad because of the type of person that Lex is, you have no idea the emotional depth that actually that bond went into.
Mm-hmm.
But when Bizarro is killed, Lex Luthor's like, this is fine. I can't believe you did that. But
to my monster. That's why. I'm upset.
I think that's his line
too.
He's
my
like,
monster.
That's my monster. Because the whole time during the comic, you have kind of Bizarro tagging along with them, and he's not really saying any words, but you could see that he's like a little puppy following
and
his
Lex kind
owner.
of comforts him at certain points too. I mean, not like doty, but
it's so well written and hilarious as a concept too, because it's Superman. Whoever came up with the concept must have been like, I got it. Superman and Frankenstein. And he just dropped his pen. He's like, and walked away. This is so good.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the guy. For me, that's the standout moments for this one. I mean, it's just so. It doesn't necessarily make a great crossover, but it is a fantastic one because
it's unique.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so
and
fun.
Yeah, and it's not, the stakes are super high, but you just focus on this team. You focus on the villains, and it's like, oh yeah, I forgot the Justice League's dead. Like, you kind of forget about them in a way. Like, you don't need them.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want them to come back.
No, yeah.
And
At least not for this crossover.
But interestingly, in that foil sense of things, this reflects really well on the Justice League, because why do our hero villains, why do Lex and his Injustice Society, why do they win? Well, they win because of those Jerry Springer things, because the bad Justice, the crime syndicate,
they fell apart from within.
They're so awful and selfish, and it almost suggests like, oh, the reason the Justice League is successful is because they care about each other and they work together and they're not selfish assholes
and not impregnating each other.
They shouldn't. Well, and they should pay child support if they do.
I think it's worth mentioning that the last issue, number 7 for Forever Evil, was delayed 2 months because Johns was like, I need more time. Yeah. I need to figure this out. And it wasn't like he needed more pages.
This one is pretty short for how big it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing, I guess, because Nightwing is my favorite character, the way they chose to wrap it up after the crossover event in Nightwing's comic, that Nightwing number 30 kind of felt more like Grayson Zero.
Interesting.
And they had unreleased pages of what it was supposed to look like. It was drawn by Megan Hettricks, and it was like his funeral and all of the Justice League and the Robins and Bruce like dealing with his death, quote. And instead, they went with a whole 12 pages of Bruce and Dick like punching each other and it being like advertised as Grayson. So, I mean, I guess maybe the wrap up after, like the world ending.
Oh, so like the aftermath
me,
of
the
some
world
of the
ending consequences that happened after Forever Evil wasn't tied up in the way that I would have preferred. And again, they got pretty far because you see the sketches that Megan and Hettricks did.
Yeah, I mean, with the story this big and like, you know, the Justice League obviously comes back at the end of it and everything's fine and dandy. I mean, with just building such a big story and focusing on a different type of people, I could see the challenges that they might have to where do we go from here? Like, yeah, the villains helped, but are they still going to be super bad to these people? Like,
nothing's perfect. As a Deathstroke fan and a Black Adam fan, Deathstroke's barely in this, which I felt like there's way more room for him. He's a really cool character, and and I mean, I just want to see Deathstroke.
Yeah, he switches teams really quickly.
Oh, which I'm actually okay with, but I get that. Yeah, I understand why people would want more. The other thing,
I was going to say, just to explain the teams I was talking about, he was with the crime syndicate, like working with them because they try to recruit all the villains. Like, oh, it's our time now, and Deathstroke was like, oh, I'll join you guys. And then when they fought the Injustice League, the Lex Luthor team, and then they kind of beat them, Lex is like, oh, you should join us, or somebody said that, and he's like, okay.
I mean, I like that just because I feel like he's so for sale, it makes sense. But for now, it's also a little, they're trying to create a turning point, like, oh, I didn't see that coming. And then, the other thing is I'm such a Black Adam fan. It's Mary Sueism. It's fine. They do need to do that sometime, but they're trying to show how powerful Ultraman is. So they use Black Adam to just get the crap kicked out of him.
Yeah.
I really liked it.
You wouldn't if you really like Black Adam.
No, I really do like Black Adam. I just thought it was a cool way to kind of incapacitate him, kind of like.
Oh, he breaks his jaw. So he can't use the word.
Yeah. Which I thought was cool, like, because I don't think I've seen that before. And it was like, oh, how do you make them not be able to use their power?
To me, it's not him losing the fight. It's not him having his jaw broken. It's like that they have to do it in what I think is almost a childishly walking over the character. It's a personal pet peeve. I kind of hate when you have a fight and the writer has to make it like one character destroying the other one, just like, oh, you tried to punch. It's like Dragon Ball Z. What I hate about watching Dragon Ball Z, where there's sort of like, oh, you think you're powerful? Well, I'm just getting started. And then like, it's just,
I think in terms of comics, it's probably to save page space. They need to establish really quickly that Ultraman is OP.
The threat.
Yeah.
I mean, he does move. Since Ultraman is the analog to Superman, his weakness is the yellow sun that gives Superman powers.
Yeah.
I mean, he literally makes a permanent eclipse.
Moving in this.
Yeah, he moves the
kryptonite
moon.
makes him more powerful.
Yeah.
And he's eaten a bunch of kryptonite.
Yeah, he's whacked out of his mind.
Yeah.
Which makes sense that he broke
Crank.
Black Adam's jaw.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Fine. Oh, I love it. It's great now.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is Forever Evil.
Yeah.
All right, and now for comic book recommendation time. Do this every episode. Like I said, every time. I think it's great. Because I like people to kind of learn more about this stuff, or if they've already read it, maybe they don't know the one that we'll recommend. But yeah, so for mine, I had Crisis on Infinite Earths. The only one that really makes sense to follow up with that is the literal follow-up to it, which is Infinite Crisis. Came out, it was 2005, 2006 by Jeff Johns. We've talked about him 3 times in this episode.
But he's freaking awesome, that's why.
He's great. And so yeah, I mean, that one just it's the sequel to it. So at the end of Crisis on Infinite Earths, you had Alexander Luthor, Lois Lane from Earth 2, and Superboy Prime. They kind of left to go to this Paradise universe because they didn't technically belong with the new one that was made. And you find out in this one, Infinite Crisis, that they were kind of monitoring the heroes and the Earth that was, or the universe that was newly made, and they just kind of spiral into madness. And the plan that they come back with is pretty crazy. There's a lot of crazy stuff that happens in this one. I will not spoil it because you should read it. It's pretty good. Art's fantastic. But yeah, Infinite Crisis by Jeff Johns. Jared?
So my pick is going to be Kingdom Come, which honestly, pound for pound, might be one of my favorite crossovers of all time. In brief summary, something awful has happened to the DC heroes, a horrible event, and they've all gone into retirement. But in their absence, a bunch of new upstart, amoral heroes have taken over.
Oh, no.
And they're destroying everything.
Yep.
And so the question is, who's going to come back out of retirement to save them? Should they? And how should they? And this is, by the way, Mark Waid writing and Alex Ross. And it's also, I think, a story that ushers in these characters into a darker modern era. I think it's Mark Waid in a lot of ways saying, or asking the question, how are these Golden Age characters going to fit into today's world? And this is answering that question. It's really wonderful. Great writing. Check it out.
It has a Superman, one of the Supermen from Crisis on Infinite Earths in it too. So kind of ties into that.
Mine really doesn't tie in to my crossover or any crossovers that we mentioned here. I'm just using this as a platform to further indoctrinate people into being Batfam fans. So my crossover recommendation would be the Robin War. And it was 2015, 2016. Obviously pulls all the Robins in. The general basic concept is that the kids and teenagers of Gotham are kind of really into this this Robin movement where we are Robin.
Creepy.
Yeah, it's kind of, and so the actual Robins are like, these kids are going to get themselves killed. So they decide to work together to train these children
So enabling
to survive. Yeah, of course, in a very Batman way, enables these children. But spoiler alert, it was kind of Dick Grayson's plan was to safely get these children arrested so that they don't die. I just spoiled it, but it's so good.
That is funny.
Please,
Is there a
please
safer
read it.
place than prison? Yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah,
there are many safer
not
places.
prison.
I mean, in Gotham, though, you might be safer.
That is true. So yeah, those are our recommendations. They will be on the blog as well, so you can find them there. Mm-hmm. And then 2 episodes in a row, we got another Patreon
Yay.
person. Yeah. So her name is Ashley. But what's her last name?
It's like Kazmar.
Kazmar. Yeah.
We apologize if we're butchering your name.
Hey, but that sounds like a superhero name
But
already.
thank you so much, Miss Ashley.
Yes, thank you so much. Eternally grateful for that. So now we have to give her a superpower.
Okay.
Maybe her pinkies
What about her pinkies?
are super strong.
Oh,
Maybe.
that's super
No,
classy.
they are.
That is very classy.
She has super strength in her pinkies. I love it.
Because you might be at a party and somebody's like, how do I open this Topo Chico? And
Classy broad.
She does it, but the thing is that she is so insistent about being a superhero rather than just do it casually. She's like, just wait, and she runs to the bathroom and puts her costume on. Breaks through the bathroom door with her pinkies, yelling Casmar, which is a great superhero name, as we've established. And she opens at Topo Chico. And then that's pretty much her contribution to the night. It's good.
So thank you. And if you want your own little backstory that she just got, you can go to Patreon and do that too.
I would also like to give a shout out to Philly Cheesesteak. That's his name on Instagram. He recommends.
I thought you meant the concept.
No,
just the concept.
random sandwich.
They're so good. You guys, I shout out.
I would recommend bagel bites before Philly Cheesesteak.
Let it be known.
But no, this person introduced me to Dick Grayson, Boy Wonder. It's a book about his entire history that I've never heard of before.
So it like combines all of it?
Yep. 75 years of Dick Grayson history.
That's so cool.
Yeah, thank you so much for that recommendation.
Yeah, guys, send us stuff. I mean, we love finding out this new stuff. We love that people are reaching out. Like,
yeah, we've been really clear about like we're not comic book experts. We're comic book fans. If you think there's stuff that we should be reading that we're not, please give us
or correct us. We love to be corrected nicely.
Yeah.
Correct.
Or come to where we work and blow us kisses. What's that? Blow us kisses.
It's weird
at work.
now.
Yeah. Keep your distance. But...
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Goodbye. Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at the Fantom Zone Pod for more podcast updates.
Who's going to get into it?
We're all going to get into it.
We're all going to get
Get pumped.
into it. Crossovers.